Okay, now we move into our gospel passage, which comes from Mark chapter 1. We're still in Mark chapter 1. This is the last time. The last week we were in Mark chapter 1, which I suppose is fitting because next Sunday won't even be ordinary time anymore. So this 5-week stretch of ordinary time that we've got, we spent the entire time in Mark chapter 1. Oh no, I take that back. We had something from John. That's right, I remember. That's probably why it took us so long to get through this chapter. Anyway, it is a long chapter. Okay, let's get in. Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through 45. Here we go. A leper came to Jesus and kneeling down begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it. Be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then, warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. He said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. Okay, there we go. So that's really nice. So, of course, there's an obvious connection here between our first reading and our gospel. Our first reading talking about leprosy and diagnosing leprosy and people who have leprosy, those kinds of things. Moving in now to this leper who comes to encounter Jesus. Now, this is some really good stuff. Okay, so this guy has leprosy, which, remember, according to the first reading, if a person had leprosy, what were they supposed to do? They were supposed to dwell outside the tent or outside of the camp. They're supposed to dwell apart from society. They were not allowed to offer worship to God. They had to declare themselves unclean, unclean. And here we have a leper coming to Jesus. So he probably, it doesn't say that he was announcing that he was unclean. It also doesn't say that he wasn't announcing that he was unclean. But either way, people are supposed to stay away from healthy people if they have leprosy. And this leper does not stay away from Jesus, who is not only is Jesus healthy, but the leper sees in Jesus the one who can make him healthy. Which is, again, like this is a really strange thing. If you just sort of set aside the reality that you are a Christian right now, that you're listening to this and you believe in Jesus, if you're taking this in, like, in the moment, this is a really strange thing. That this guy comes up to Jesus and just simply, he does what? He kneels down. In some ways, like, this is an act of worship. He kneels down before him and he begs him, he says, "If you wish, you can make me clean." That's like, hold on a minute. Who can do that? Who can do that? In fact, there's a scene in the second book of Kings when this guy Naaman, he has leprosy, and he goes, he's sent by his commander, he's sent to the king of Israel, and he sends a letter with him, and the letter says, "Look, this guy has leprosy. I understand that you can heal him." And the king's response in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 7, he says, "Wait a minute, am I a God with power over life and death that this man should send someone to me to be cured of leprosy? Am I a God?" Right? So that's the response. Like, who can cure this disease? God can. And in that moment, Elisha, the prophet, who is empowered by God with that divine power, he is able to cure Naaman of his leprosy by telling him to go and bathe in the water. And Naaman goes and he bathes 7 times, and he comes out with fresh skin. He's cured of his leprosy. But the point is that ultimately it's only the divine power that can cure this leprosy. So now when this leper comes up to Jesus and says, "If you wish, you can make me clean," it's not even as though, it's that this leper sees in Jesus or understands in Jesus that there is divine power. This leper who had been isolated from the community, this leper who had been isolated from worship, he sees in Jesus divine power. You know, there's something about, as I'm thinking about this now, that there are some people within the Catholic Christian tradition that currently now and throughout history that have made a decision to give themselves entirely to the Lord by living as consecrated men and women, entering religious life or entering a life of solitude. So, of course, there are active religious orders like the Franciscans, the Dominicans, etc. But there are also some religious who they go and they live in a cloistered community, in a monastery, and they don't ever leave the monastery. They're there, and they don't really entertain guests either. They just live their lives in solitude. What do? They live their lives in solitude apart from the community, apart from society. And in living apart from that, they're actually able to encounter Jesus more clearly. They see him more clearly. Now, it's true that they have worship in these places of solitude, but they're living apart from the world, and so living apart from the world, there's something about it that allows you to see more clearly, actually. So it could be the case that this man's leprosy, because it forced him to be apart from society and in seclusion and solitude, it could be that actually was like the catalyst that allowed him to see Jesus more clearly. Oh, that's a fascinating thing. So Job, we talked about this last week. Last week. Job, because of his sickness, these people who were healed by Jesus last week, because of their sickness, all these people who were brought, it allowed them to be healed by Jesus. Job, going through his time of suffering, it allowed him to appreciate greater the gifts that he received at the end of his suffering from the Lord. And it's through this suffering, actually, that these people were able to see Jesus more clearly. So it's through this leprosy that this leper was able to see Jesus more clearly and be healed by him. Because he got to hear those words that Jesus, moved with pity, he stretched out he touched him. Now remember, we talked about this. In the Old Testament, if you touched a person with leprosy, you were considered to be ritually unclean. That you had to separate yourself a little bit, not to the extent that a full-blown leper had to, but you had to remove yourself for a bit so that you could be purified after a period of a certain amount of days. Jesus here freely touches this man, but rather than Jesus becoming unclean, he makes this man, this leper, clean. Right, so that's what happens. I do will it, being made clean. And the leprosy left him, not slowly, not gradually, but immediately. Naaman the Syrian was cured of his leprosy by going to wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Jesus, who we could say is like a new Elisha, he cures this man of leprosy immediately. He was made clean. And then Jesus does something strange that puzzles a lot of people, including me, including a lot of biblical scholars actually, where it says he warned him sternly. He dismissed him at once, but he said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." So there's kind of 2 parts here. So see that you tell no one. This is, again, I think I mentioned this last week, but this is the messianic secret. Jesus does this in a strange kind of way that he'll heal people and he'll tell them, don't say anything. Don't tell people about this. Now, of course, the man immediately goes and he starts publicizing the whole thing. He publicized the whole matter, right? He spreads it abroad so that it became impossible for Jesus to enter towns. So because he became so popular, he became so famous, like this guy heals lepers. It is amazing, and so he can't even enter towns anymore. But the point, the first part here is that Jesus tells him, don't tell anyone. This messianic secret that Jesus doesn't want his full identity to be revealed for some reason. The timing just isn't quite right. Remember that God he's just, and Jesus, who is God, he is just as well, and so he knows that the perfect timing for things. And so there must be something in him that he's just like, okay, I don't want to fully reveal this quite yet because I don't want the timing. Now that doesn't mean that this man was necessarily sinning but because like who could blame him for like, I was healed by Jesus. I had leprosy. I was apart from worship. I was apart from the community. I was apart from my family, and then I encountered this guy and he touched me, and rather than him becoming unclean, I was made clean. Now, what is something still needs to be done, and that's what he says. Go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. So our first reading was from Leviticus chapter 13. In Leviticus chapter 14, the author, traditionally known to be Moses, but the author then lays out for the priests, for the Levitical priests, that they are to be the ones who make a determination on somebody's cleanliness. That if someone has what appears to be leprosy, the priest is actually supposed to examine that person and make a determination about whether that person is clean or unclean. Sometimes there's like periods of time where it's like, I'm not really sure, you got to come back in 7 days, and then I will declare. Other times where it's just like a clear-cut case, like, no, I see based on the color of the hair around the leprosy, based on what that blotch looks like, so it's like kind of a gross thing, right? So it's like, I'm glad right now we don't have to do that. But what do priests do now today? Priests today, they make a determination on somebody's spiritual cleanliness when those people come to the sacrament of reconciliation. So leprosy could be seen as something of like a physical sickness that has its comparison, or that has its connection with spiritual sickness, which is sin. And the priest in the Old Testament would make a determination on somebody's ritual cleanliness based on whether their body was healthy, their body was full of life. Now priests today make a determination on someone's spiritual cleanliness based on their soul's condition, whether their soul is sick or whether their soul is full of life. And that comes through in the sacrament of reconciliation. So just another really, really nice connection. So anyway, so Jesus tells him to offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. Well, what does Moses prescribe? He prescribes for those who are cleansed of their leprosy, for those who go through the period of purification and they are determined to be clean, they are to offer what? 2 birds, 2 lambs. They are to wash their clothes and to wash their bodies. So go and do that, Jesus tells him to do. Go and let the priest make that determination. Now, this I think is a fascinating thing that I know I've mentioned before, but Jesus, of course, was a Jewish man, and so he is very familiar with the laws of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. They didn't call it the Old Testament. They just called it the Scriptures. So Jesus is very familiar with the laws of the Torah, that Hebrew word that means law. And so being a faithful Jew, he would have been obedient to that law. And so he's telling this man who's a leper, look, if you want to fully return to worship, I have made you clean. But if you want to fully return to worship, you need to follow the law so that the priest can make the proper determination towards you that he will make because I've made you clean, but that needs to be proof for those people. So I think that's a really, really cool thing. So anyway, so like this is cool. We see like this connection, of course, between the first reading and the gospel, where the first reading we're introduced to some people that we might call like the walking dead. You know, like they've got this disease, this thing that separates them, that isolates them. But then from that place of isolation, this man who's experiencing this, he sees Jesus and he sees him clearly and he knows that Jesus can heal him. And Jesus then does heal him. And in healing him, he brings him back to the full community, to the full worship that has been ordained for God's people to enter into, to engage, and to offer. Beautiful. So good. All right, we'll see you for the next session. I'm excited to share the second reading with you too. God bless you.